people who are joining us online and people in the office, and some people who aren't able to make it, so we'll just record for them. I'll just turn off the transcription though. Oh, I heard the Christchurch office is there, but their camera's not working. So they can still see us and hear us, hopefully. All right, so I think we'll begin. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Arasi Posimani tōku ingoa, ko Mangarei te Maunga, ko Manukau te Moana, no Waikato me Hingapoa me Niue o ke tipuna, no Tamaki Makaurau ahau, kei te noho ki Ototahi. No mai haere mai ki tēnei hui, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this panel discussion hosted by the Jacobs New Zealand Inclusion and Diversity Committee and the United Nations Association of New Zealand. My name is Arasi Posimani. I'm a bridge engineer based in Ototahi, Christchurch, and I'm also a member of the I&D committee. So a huge welcome to everybody who's joined us online and in the office, and a huge welcome and a big thank you to our guests who have generously given us their time today. We have 3 guest panelists joining us today. Sonoa Mali'i Karanina Sumeo, Dr. Jill Greer, and Tanya Williams. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you shortly. I'll just start with some quick housekeeping. This meeting's being recorded, as I said. If you're joining us online, please keep your microphones muted and your camera off. If you have some questions, you can drop them into the meeting chat, and I'll be asking them to our panelists. If you're in the office, we have a member of our I&D committee there with you, or there's a laptop there that you can add your questions in there too. We do have limited time and a very big topic to tackle, so we'll do our best to get all of your questions to our panelists and make the most of our guests while we have them. So the questions that will be the main focus of this panel are what can we do as a STEM company to attract and retain women in the industry? And how can we encourage women who may have left their STEM careers to re-enter the industry? What do we need to know about pay equity, and how can we build pay equity into our culture, policies and practices? And how can the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 5 and 10 play a role in promoting gender equality and reduce inequalities in the engineering sector in New Zealand? And what is New Zealand's government approach to implementing these Sustainable Development Goals? I'll pop these questions in our chat so you can refer to them as we go through the call. The first thing I'd like to do as well is I'd like to introduce Gaia Paranasamy, who's on our call. She's the president of the United Nations Association of New Zealand, also known as UNANZ. It is thanks to Gaia and UNANZ that we're having this event. Gaia Paranasamy, this is her second term as the president, and prior to that, she served as the vice president for 2 years, and this is a voluntary role. So she's a senior cost estimator for Transpower, and in 2019, Gaia received the highly commended for Rising Star Category Award under the National Association of Women in Construction, also known as NAWIC. She's also a member of NAWIC. Gaia is very passionate about climate change and equality. So I'll just pass the time over to you, Gaia. Oh, Gaia, sorry, I think we can't quite hear you. I see you're not on mute though. Oh, I hope we haven't lost her. Gaia, are you still there?
She'll come back. Surely she'll come back.
Apologies. I do know Gaia has had some trouble before, so.
We can see you. Now you're on mute.
We can see you, Gaia.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, fantastic.
Okay, awesome. There's something wrong with my camera, but that's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Odyssey. So, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, enga mana, enga reo, enga karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou. And now in my mother tongue, wanakam. Sorry that all of you can't see me, and all of you know how I look like. So, and the most important is the panel discussion. So I'll do my introduction really quick. A very good afternoon. And as the president of the United Nations Association of New Zealand, I extend a very warm welcome to all, and thank you for tuning in to our panel discussion, Shaping Our Future Engineering with Gender Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. So first of all, I want to thank Jacob Engineering for co-hosting with UNANZ on this event. For those of you who don't know UNENZ, United Nations Association of New Zealand, we were established 76 years ago and are known as the People's Movement for the United Nations in New Zealand. UNENZ promotes and supports the aims and objectives of the United Nations and is committed to the ideals embodied in the United Nations Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we are a means by which the principle of United Nations Charter and can be shared widely and its vision realized. So UNENZ is a non-governmental and national organization made up of 7 regional branches, a youth association, some of you might know, UN Youth, and affiliates across New Zealand. UNENZ is also a registered charity and a member of the World Federation of United Nations Association, which is known to be WAFUNA. UNENZ is not an agency of the United Nations, but is associated to the Economic and Social Council through WAFUNA. So our goal is to help New Zealanders understand the UN and promote engagement with it. We work together with others to raise the importance of finding ways to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, global security, and UN renewal. I want to mention the 3 concepts that comes together with the work we do. Mana Kitanga, love and compassion, Kaitia Kitanga, guardianship, and Kota Hitanga, togetherness. So here we are today in collaboration with Jacobs Engineering to have this important discussion on equality. We have a range of panelists with different experiences and backgrounds to provide suggestions. I encourage the panelists to be bold and think of out of their comfort zone to have this kind of discussion that could help the engineering sector to be more open to equality and improving equity. Before I pass the mic to Odyssey, I just want to thank the panelists for taking the time to participate in this discussion. I would also like to thank again Jacob Engineering, especially to Alex McDonald and Odyssey for helping to pull this event together. And lastly, for those who are of you who are interested in getting to know more about the United Nations Association of New Zealand, please reach out. We are always keen to welcome new members and volunteers. Please visit our website, unenz.org.nz, or reach out on an email. Thank you. Odyssey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gaia. Gaia has also passed on some resources and magazines to each of the officers, so hopefully they're out there in Christchurch. I've got them at my desk, so I'll pass them around. So I'd like to introduce our first panelist. I'll read a little bit of her bio. So our first panelist is Saunoa Mali'i Karanina Sumeo. She's the Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner at the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. She is of Samoan descent and originally from the village of Vailima in Upolu, Samoa. Saunoa Mali'i has a strong commitment to improving equal employment opportunities, particularly bringing a Pacifica perspective to human rights issues facing Aotearoa New Zealand. For 20 years, Saunoa Mali'i has worked as a public advisor and social worker, advocating for the interests of children, women, families, the rainbow community, social protection, youth employment, gender equality, and an end to gender violence. She believes pay equity and equal employment opportunities are key avenues for youth empowerment, women's empowerment, reduction of family poverty, freedom from gender-based violence, and community well-being. Saunoa Mali'i holds qualifications in social work, social policy, mediation, and science, including a PhD in public policy from AUT. Saunoa Mali'i, thank you so much for joining us. I'll pass the floor to you for your opening remarks on this topic.
E ngā mana i ngā reo, tēnā koutou, whakarowhalai atu, namaste, mālole soifua, mālole nang mama. And thank you very much, Gaia and Odyssey, for the opportunity to come in and speak with you. I don't want to speak for too long, because I know we won't have time for questions, but I just want to acknowledge that this is a really a welcome session. And I just want to say hello to Tanya and Jill. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you both. In 2019, the Human Rights Commission actually went to the United Nations along with representatives from Fulton Hogan and Ernst & Young and Girl Boss to talk about this very topic STEM. You know, what are we doing to encourage our young women and young girls to consider these careers. And you know, so they gave some perspectives, but clearly we have a long way to go. And I'm really enjoying sitting here and looking at the diversity of the tables and Jacobs from the two offices that I can see. So I mean that's really encouraging to see that. Certainly in terms of pay equity, you know, we all have fundamental rights for equal employment opportunities, and that includes, you know, pay equity, you know, right to just and favorable conditions of work, to be safe, because that's another issue. If we're going to encourage women to come into male-dominated professions, you know, you need to be prepared, you know, to make sure that they're safe when they come there, that they're supportive so that you can hang on to them, that there's non-discrimination within organizations, and you've got really good policies and really good leadership. You know, when I say that, I'm thinking about, you know, should something happen around bullying and sexual harassment, any form of harassment, you know, make sure that you're ready for them, so that when you do attract their talents, that you're ready to ensure they have equal opportunity to progress and so forth. So yeah, happy to talk further when we get to the questions, but whakataitele for the opportunity to be here. Yeah.
Kia ora, thank you so much. I'd like to now go to our next speaker, Dr. Jill Greer. Dr. Jill Greer co-edited the People's Report on the New Zealand's progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in 2019 for Huie as an alternate report. Jill is a board member of Amnesty International New Zealand and a number of other organisations, and is the former Director General of the International Planned Parenthood Federation in London, with members in over 160 countries. As well as leadership of organisations and national and international coalitions, Jill has wide experience in governance and advisory roles and has served on advisory groups for 3 New Zealand Ministers of Foreign Affairs. Much of her work has been with a community focus in New Zealand and internationally, with a focus on diversity, inclusion, and collaboration, seeking to ensure that the most vulnerable individuals and communities, in particular women, girls, young people, LGBTQ+, and the disabled, are heard and supported to have the opportunity to realise their full potential. Jill, I'll pass the time over to you now. Jill, apologies, I think you are
Sorry,
mute.
thank you very much
you.
indeed. Kia ora tātou. It's a real pleasure to be here, and congratulations to Jacobs and to UNANS for collaborating and organising this event. And thank you to all of you who have come and given up your lunch hour as well. I hope that it will be useful, and I look forward to the discussions. I really also want to recognise the work that Jacobs are doing already towards greater sustainability, and your commitment to the importance of gender equality, diversity and inclusion. And having prowled around your website, I can see that it's not just words. There is a great deal happening and some very exciting initiatives, and I would love to learn more about them. I think it's also great to see business working with NGOs. It's, if you like, SDG 17 in action. It's collaboration and partnership. And if we could do so much more in this direction, for example, when I was CEO of Volunteer Service Abroad, we had a fantastic relationship with another engineering firm where young engineers, for example, in the Solomons, on short-term secondment, were able to help to build 20 school libraries. And the people of the Solomons saw women engineers for the first time and said, hey, actually women can do this. So very exciting, and I encourage you to do more in that direction, because sadly I think careers advice, and I was briefly a careers advisor, well, actually for a few years, in fact a very well-known broadcaster, when I was teaching her and her careers advisor, I said, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to become an architect. I said, you wouldn't think of journalism, broadcasting? No. A year later I saw her and she said, I've changed my mind. I'm going into journalism. So, you know, those discussions are so important. Our parents are so important in making our choices. And I think we need to keep that in mind as well. A couple of things just to say right up front in terms of where we are and where I am. Firstly, I have to confess I am no way an engineer. my maths teacher threw a tin of pencils at me, and that made me decide that I wasn't going to continue with maths. So that was the end of my hope of being a doctor. Though later at IPPF, working with doctors and nurses and sexuality educators, I was able to get a little bit of taste of what it might have been like. Secondly, my father, who was an engineer, working in Malaysia and Hong Kong and New Zealand and Australia. When I was small and a boarder at school here, at the age of 8, he came to visit me, and he took me on the ferry to visit his parents in Devonport. And my father actually designed, if you've been on it, the Devonport Wharf, and it's very long. And we got off the ferry and we started walking, and I looked up at him and I said, "Why did you make it so long?" And he said to me, "Think about it, Jill." And I thought, and I walked and I thought. And when we were nearly at the end, I said, "So the boats won't go aground?" And he smiled, "Yes." But I think that was enough to persuade him that I should never be an engineer. And in fact, he wondered at the value in investing in my university education at all, because he said she will only marry someone and work in their kitchen for the rest of her life. So, you know, it's a pleasure to be here to talk about, as someone who's had a very, very accidental career in a number of areas, in spite of many obstacles, and say we can do this, but we can only do it if organizations like yours reach out to young women, reach out to their parents. It's not enough to talk to Pacifica women. Talk to the parents. Otherwise, they will say, "You are teaching my daughter what I've taught her not to do," which is to argue with her lecturers. I have spent her whole life telling her to obey adults. We have to work with the parents. We have to work with communities. The careers services in New Zealand are not strong these days. And in some ways, organizations like both of these need to step up if we're to achieve the goal that is so important. Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to more discussion.
Kia ora, thank you, Jill. I will move on to introducing our last panelist, Tanya Williams. Tanya Williams is the General Manager at Engineering New Zealand Te Ao Rangahau, the professional body for New Zealand's engineers. Tanya joined Engineering New Zealand 5 years ago after a long career at engineering and management consulting firm MWH, which is now Stantec, where she was General Manager of Water and Waste. Tanya was involved in the establishment of the Diversity Agenda, which is a joint initiative between Engineering New Zealand, ACE New Zealand, and the Institute of Architects to focus on increasing diversity in our professions. Welcome, Tanya. Please give us your opening thoughts on this topic.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Tanya Williams, tōku ingoa, noa te tare o Te Ao Rangahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you all. It won't surprise any of you working in Jacobs that I have prepared a slide presentation, because I am the engineer on this panel and I can't help myself. So bear with me and I will go, but it is a real privilege, and I thank and Odyssey and my two fellow panelists who I'm very humbled to be here today. What I wanted to do, is that okay, Odyssey? Can you see?
Yes, I can see that. If I could get a thumbs up from the officers.
Yep.
Awesome.
All right. So I wanted to very quickly, before we went further into the questions, just say what Engineering New Zealand and ACE NZ and the Institute of Architects are doing already, just to fill in. So hopefully you will have all heard of the Diversity Agenda. And I'm sorry it's not in presentation mode, but I can't have two screens and do that. So I'm going to just do it like this. There we go. So just really quickly, I was part of a panel who set this up. In 2018, we had done a lot of work on diversity, but none of it was making much traction. The numbers were not changing. And so what we did was we set up the Diversity Agenda, a deliberate plan on words, because we thought all the advice and the research that we got at that time said that if you were going to tackle diversity, start with gender and then use those same tools and techniques to broaden diversity to everything. And that is exactly what we've done. So our initial focus was on gender statistics, and then over the last few years we have broadened to all facets of diversity. So the ambition, and I'm not going to read through, there is a website which you can read through all our ambitions, but it is absolutely what you are aiming to talk about today. It is about encompassing all diversity and inclusion through awareness, empowerment and action. It's about broadening the conversation, adding diversity at the senior leadership levels. So this is what we're all about. Membership is free to that, and Jacobs is a member of both the Accord and the diversity agenda itself. There are workshops and things. Hopefully some of you have been able to attend those. The next bit I want to talk about is an outcome after the diversity agenda was set up. The member firms were saying that's not enough. There needs to be some more accountability, some peer support and accountability through getting some hard numbers in front of them. So in 2020, as the COVID was starting, we launched, before we had lockdowns, in Parliament with 50 firms as signatories. And the aim here is that once a year, all the firms, including Jacobs, give us their numbers. So they are not published, but they are talked about in a once a year forum where they talk about the progress that the firms have made, what they're struggling with, share ideas, so that they can really help each other in a really, it is all about carrot, it's not about stick, it is about encouragement, sharing tools and techniques, what's working, and to try and do that. So, yeah, I'm not going to go there. It's about the commitment, and these are all available. What I want you to see here is just the top lines. It is about leaders and decision makers. It's about people, our people having influence. It is about that we expect fair and inclusive treatment for everybody, which should be a given. So I wanted to show you some of the statistics just to help for today as well. So hopefully you see there that currently, as I focused on gender, as this talk was on gender, that 17% of our members are women. That is much more strongly weighted to their, we are closer to 30% at the student levels, and right through to a very low percentage when you get to our fellows and distinguished fellows. So it is very much as people have gone in, the architects, because they're at 32. I was talking about, and these figures down the bottom and the bottom line are all about engineering firms. These are not the architectural firms. So we have in senior management roles as of this year, as of the kind of census that we just did, 19.5% of women in the technical leadership roles of firms. The pay gap, which we're going to talk about here, so the gender pay gap, so that's the pay gap overall, is 16.2%, but amongst member firms, and these are all member firms, the equity gap, which is role for role, if you're doing the same role, is down to 4.6. We consider that should be 0, absolutely, but it is gratifying to see that when we started this, it was up at the same level. It was about 15%. So bringing it down to 4 is an achievement, but it is, it needs to be 0. So we're moving forward on it. I also want to show that the numbers of Māori and Pacifica and the rainbow community are increasing as well. What I would say is the rainbow community is something that we haven't asked about before. This is the first year we've asked, and some of the firms still don't feel comfort in asking that of their employees. So I imagine it is higher than that, but this is the numbers that we have. I want to show that we do have a lot of resources online, and so please do use those. One of the ones that, and I won't speak to it here, that I want to say on pay equity, we do have an article. You may not be able to see that, but don't worry, it's on there, about some of the ideas from some of our members on how you can close that pay equity gap and keep it closed. So we have got some really useful resources on there. I also want to just quickly give a plug for anybody who would like to go into schools. It's not an age-based thing. I am an ambassador at my children's school. The Wonder Project is our initiative to try and encourage children, and particularly women, Māori and Pacific Island children, into STEM careers. And it is through fun activities like the Rocket Challenge, which I'm currently doing at the moment, which the kids absolutely love to see the practical side of maths and science and experience it with a role model, you in the classroom, a true engineer or scientist or someone in that can really tell them how maths and science is useful. Because at the age, we're doing this between ages 9 to 12, at that age is when they decide whether they're good at maths and science, whether it's boring, whether they can see a career in it. So it's really good to catch. I appreciate this is way down in the pipeline, but it is one of the initiatives that we're going. We definitely do not have all the answers, but I wanted to share some of what we are doing in this space. Thanks, Odyssey.
Kia ora, Tanya, thank you so much. So to all our attendees, I hope this has given you some spark some inspiration for some questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll be reading as we go. But to, I guess, kick off some of this discussion, our first broad question of what can we do as a STEM company to attract and retain women in the industry, and how can we encourage women who may have left the STEM industry to rejoin? If we're talking, I guess, picking up from where you left off, Tanya, if we're talking about outreach as an option, as you said, that is quite early in the pipeline, but we have low numbers of women entering university, and it's kind of mirrored in the graduate recruitment statistics of around, but probably less than 30%, I think, is where it's sort of hovered. So can you talk a bit more, I might start with you, Tanya, about the importance of that, of reaching women or girls early on in their education? What sort of impact does that have in their choices? How can teachers also influence that? And we'll just start with you, Tanya, if you could speak more to that.
I could speak all day on this. It is so important, as I say, to get in. We have done research from overseas that shows it is about the 9 to 12-year-old age group that you've got to get that. That's when they're still listening to everyone else and not just their peers. So it's really important to get in at that age group. It's really important to try and encourage their parents to be part of it. We try and make sure the parents know what we're doing and are involved in some way through this as well. It's the time when you are saying that they are good at it. Like I go in the classes that I go to, I always say, your teacher has told me that you are all brilliant at maths and science, so I expect this will be a breeze for you. Just that reassurance that they are good helps, just that not throwing pencils, as Jill was saying, because those kind of experiences, I'm not good at this, stay with them for a long time. It is also just to know that is our schools program, but we also work with the Tertiary Education Institute to put people in for career talks into secondary schools as well. So we do at that age as well. So we are trying to we also support the likes of Canterbury University, who get year 12 students, and firms sponsor a girl to go in and do a week-long course, and every day they do fun activities in one discipline, and that has, so they have about 60 girls there for a week in a school holidays in their second to last year of secondary school, and that has shown huge promise in those areas. I have spoken to those girls and they're so excited to be at the engineering school and contributing. So there are a lot of initiatives out there to get it in. I would say that that's one side, and the other part that the diversity agenda was set up to do is then keeping them once they are in the profession and they have done the training, they're in a firm. The diversity agenda is very much, and we have not nailed either. There's still so much we need to learn, but we are trying different techniques at both ends.
Fantastic. Jill, if I could also pass that question over to you about how important it is to reach women and girls in school, as you mentioned, as a former career advisor. And we've also had a question from the chat that I'd like to add, which is, do we understand why girls aged 9 to 12 potentially, in quotes, don't like maths or science, or maybe feel like they're not equipped to take these subjects? Oh, apologies, Jill. I think you might also be on mute again.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Too busy making a note. Thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment just to talk about an example of what I saw in the States, which is a positive one, which isn't always the case, which kind of takes what Tanya's just described further. It was a program for students who had B grades and C grades. It was thought the A grade students would succeed anyway, and they were not allowed to have a drug habit, and it was very clearly and carefully researched. Basically, university students from the Ag College and the university mentored students from high schools, particularly in the low income groups and lower socioeconomic areas of this particular city, in maths, science and computing, but also in English. And I think with engineering, people forget, as my father in fact did teach me, that communication is actually the most important thing of all. And after some time and being coached in this way, at the same time, and this is the challenge, can you broaden it? The City Council provided free tickets to every major sports and cultural event in the city. Employers provided holiday work, as did you've described already, and mentoring at that time. And parents were asked to sign up to the program. And when we tried a small program like this for year 10 girls in science at Vic, we asked the parents to sign up. And it made such a difference. The conversation as to why and how and what does it mean. And it was very exciting to see. I met those students and they were doing phenomenally well. And I think because they had employers supporting it, the council supporting it, and the universities and Ag College doing it, it worked, fantastically well. I think another is, and coming back to those 8 and 9-year-olds, we need to get rid of the stereotypes. And interesting enough, it's fathers who have, according to some research, a greater impact on girls' choice of vocation than mothers, which is not what I would have necessarily expected. And I think that close working relationship with schools, with careers advisors where they exist from a very early age. And I think, we look at Lego and things like that, and I think, girls are actually attracted to a lot of that. But also they are attracted to the other side. And you haven't just got STEM, you've got STEAM. And so they're also attracted to language and motivating people and to speaking. Look at all of us sitting here today. So those would be a few things that I would add in there. But I also think you need incentives. In New Zealand, there used to be a tūtangata program to encourage young Māori into nursing and medicine and science. It was scrapped because of costs. And when I came back and told Parliament's Education Committee about what I'd seen in the US that I've just described, I was told, well, if Vic wants to stop teaching philosophy and do this instead, good luck to them. To which my answer was, this isn't about Victoria. This is about our young people. And we need to do more. Thank you. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Jill. So Noa Mali'i, do you have something you'd like to add as well on that topic of outreach to reaching girls and women in school?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting just seeing also the feedback from Jacob's staff about people's thoughts about parental influence and that sort of thing, which I totally agree. When I grew up, I loved science. There was never a sort of thing in my house about what girls and boys, what careers were on and off for you. So I do agree, it'd be great. The outreach is great, but ultimately you got to get into the houses, you got to get to the churches, you got, to get into those associations where the preachers and the people that parents listen to, also buy into this new vision for our young people. And that investment is not going to see fruit in a year. You got to keep going there. You got to keep talking with them, and you need to sustain that relationship so that you get the shift that's required. I mean, I don't know, how do you make engineering cool and sexy to young people? You've just got to learn how to do that because everybody else is competing for them. Okay, because STEM subjects, that can be for nursing or health-related careers. They're already in the schools. They've been in the schools for years trying to capture that talent. So if you're prepared as an industry to do the same thing, you've got to know it's for the long haul. And as you say, Tanya, you've got to start from that earlier years when you're still thinking about it and get it. It's too late to jump in at year 10 or year 11. So I really, I think that's a great idea, Tanya, that you've got there. The other thing is teachers' expectations of our kids really influence their sense of confidence. If you don't have teachers that invest in the potential of the kids and give up on the ones that are struggling and only focus on the ones who are coping well with academia, then that also impacts the choices that our kids have and the perceptions of our parents at home about what their kids can do or not. So it's a really big challenge for us. But, talking with our teachers, with schools about basic expectations, some of that comes in, unfortunately, into racial bias. When some kids are considered less capable of certain subjects. I mean, I remember when I was in high school in Auckland Girls, I was really interested in chemistry and physics and that sort of forth, and I was basically told by the teacher that perhaps I should look at other subjects. And the Samoan in me said, "Oh, I'm not going to have that." And of course, I went on and did a science degree in chemistry. But so teacher expectations and unfortunately those attitudes that's still there do get in the way of our young people progressing. But don't give up. I assume Jacobs and others have heard of She Sharp. That they might be a good group to reach out to, and they're going out and talking to schools. They're linking with businesses again for this whole thing, trying to get our young girls to think about careers. But I think in terms of diversity, as you say, Tanya, we're thinking about diversity generally. Girls and boys and our non-binary identifying young people, attract them into here. Certainly scholarships make a difference if we're looking at our young people in families that are struggling. The scholarship is the thing that might get them over the bar so they can continue to study and not drop out partway through and go to work. I was at Manurewa High School giving a talk about pay equity just earlier in the week. They had a roll of, prior to COVID, 2,100. Post-COVID, they're struggling to get 1,500 kids back in because some of them had to drop out. So it may not necessarily that they're not good at maths or not interested in maths and science. They've got to survive. So those are the realities that we have to think about in our outreach as well. Yeah, first time.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of comments in our chat, so I'll go through and read one of the questions that popped up, which is attracting gender diversity into engineering is one thing, but keeping them is another. How do we help make engineering an attractive long-term career for the women who do graduate as engineers? I think I will start with Jill, if you have some comments on that.
I do. I think one of the main things that needs to happen across the board, firstly, is making sure we have more women in leadership roles and more women on boards, because it's been clearly proved that when that happens, policies change, culture changes, and that becomes more attractive in itself. Secondly, flexibility and recognizing the demands. Another way that I think is critically important is for us to look at the whole area around parental leave. Far fewer men in New Zealand, for example, take parental leave than in Norway or the other Nordic countries and a number of other countries. And until we sort out really the pay disparities related to that and the cost of that, it's not surprising that, women earn less during their lives and retire on less. So I think that's a critical area as well to encourage women to come back. But it is particularly around the flexibility. And if we look at COVID and the impact that that's had on women, and in terms of family and on men. And so flexibility, culture that is flexible and willing to look at people's needs. I think the whole area around LGBT, we, for example, Karolina and I were together in New York on a panel that was around ensuring that people of all genders receive the same social protection as others. And I think that group comes into this as well. And I think it's got to be visible that the difference is there. I don't mean that people should be figureheads. That's not why you appoint women onto boards and into leadership positions, but it makes a huge difference to the business, and it makes a huge difference to women's confidence. So yeah, it's critical.
Fantastic. Yeah, so flexibility and visibility of women in leadership roles.
Yes, and the policy changes that they are able to push through in terms of it, and on the board, because again, it is the board that will set the direction and management will implement it, and that will make a difference. So the more women you have pushing for it at every level, and the more that men understand the reality, and there is the world of difference, for example, between my son, who works in sustainability and so on, and is 50, and his father, in terms of how they view their family and their work, and that those are changes to be encouraged.
Thank you, Jill. On that same topic, and also as you've added in the idea of career progression in women in leadership roles, Tanya, do you have some comments to add to that?
Yeah, this is the one that we are grappling with both the subjects, how to attract and how to retain, but the retain one is arguably the harder one. And I believe that through COVID, if there is a small silver lining to COVID, it is the flexibility and the working from anywhere, which does help parents, both of all genders. But it is the leadership roles. It is, I completely agree with Jill. It is the flexibility. It's the compensation. It's the pay equity as well as the parental leave. It is the support. The other ones I'd add, it is the types of work and opportunities. Often men, as a gross generalization, are faster to put their hand up. But looking at your full team and looking at what opportunities to provide them both in the work and the training. The last one is just making sure that the mentors and advocates are there, to make sure that everybody has an equitable chance at promotion and various things. But it is something that we'd love any thoughts that anybody has, because it is something that we are still very much struggling with.
Yes, I can definitely see that there's a lot of thoughts that are popping up and contributions in the chat as well. I'd like to sort of switch, still on the same topic of attracting and retaining women, but talking about prioritizing gender balance in recruitment and in hiring. So normally, I might direct this question to you first. It can be like, we can probably generally accept that to improve the numbers of women in the workplace, we do need to hire more women. But formalizing this as a target can be potentially quite controversial, and it can sometimes have unintended consequences to backfire in things like reverse discrimination. What are your thoughts on formalizing diversity targets in hiring, and do you have any advice for navigating that potential controversy?
Yeah, good question. Because it's, what I'm finding in the area of human rights is when you try and do something, you like set some targets, now and then someone else will feel like they're going to miss out on something. So I think it's really important for the leaders in an organization to explain to the staff about why we are doing this. And I think, to bring everybody along so you don't get that sort of fear of missing out on something. But if you want to progress diversity, I believe you need to have targets. Otherwise, it's really hard then to sort of really invest properly in it, and then, focus the thinking. So without target, it's really hard for you to know that you're going to, it's like if you have a KPI, then people are going to focus on the KPI. If you're going to count something, then people are going to pay attention to it. Otherwise, it'll be a nice to do, And, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to encourage companies at the moment, businesses, is when you look at diversity, not only measure gender, but measure ethnic diversity. So even within women, there's huge diversity, even including pay. So we know, even amongst women, you know, our Pākehā sisters make more than our Māori sisters, our ethnic diversity sisters, including Pacific, and Pacific are at the bottom. So it's not enough to have your gender mix. You've got to make sure that in terms of pay equity, that there's no discrimination at all, intended or unintended, in how you pay people and how you issue your or how you distribute your progression opportunities. You know, make everything visible so people understand what are the benefits for the business. Certainly, in terms of trying to retain people, I think, you know, if you can help pay for the early childhood education, that might help, you know, some people be engaged. If you can, you know, some of our people, men and women, mostly women, are also looking after elderly parents. You know, if you can help with some of those costs, that might help you retain your talent. You know, I think of lots of young people who are currently in work, might be in a related field, but, you know, they might be interested in taking up engineering. I'll take my daughter, who went to university for a year. Decided it wasn't her. She still got the certificate, and then she was at home wondering what to do with herself. We found a welding course. She loved it. Now she's a welder, but now she's in there, she's thinking about engineering. If I had told her to go engineering and go do engineering in first year uni, nah, mom, it's my choice. But now she's come around, but there's no one knocking on those doors and saying, you know, would your young people be interested in engineering in a related field? So that might be an avenue. And the other thing, just ask your staff, how can we hold on to you? Really simple, and be prepared for some uncomfortable conversations, but that's why you ask, and then work on it. Yeah, but everything else around leadership, as we talked about, it's already been talked about, but those are just some of the things I think that might help. Yeah, Whaftai.
Fantastic. Yeah, some really, really interesting contributions there. If we move into, because we've been talking about it as well, pay equity. Tanya, if I could start with you, you've mentioned in your opening that we've got the gender pay gap and then also the equity gap. If you could just maybe elaborate a little bit more on the differences between those two.
Okay, so I'm not an expert in this field, but the way we ask to get the median pay gap is if you sum up all that people, and this year we haven't done other genders, it's just men and everything else. So if you sum up all that men are paid and divide it by the number of employees and all that women are paid, what the average salary is in an organisation, that's the gender pay gap. But the gender pay equity gap is when you look at specific roles and see if people in that role or in that band, you know, because some firms have paid bands and things are paid comparable for the same work. And so while they are both important, because what the gender pay gap claim shows that we have more men in senior positions. That is what it's generally, you know, it's indicating other things, but that is one of the things it's indicating. And that's why it's for all, there's so many reasons, from economic benefit for the organisation, for society, for women, to get more women into senior roles. That makes sense, and we absolutely are prioritising that. The equity gap is a very, in my opinion, is different and points to different issues, and a lot of that has been unconscious, but now we are asking firms to look at that consciously, to put it through those lenses. And if you look at that article that was written on there, it is about the biggest thing is to look at it, to measure it, to be conscious, to investigate differences, to challenging firms to rectify when they find that, but to continue to monitor that, because that is the way you overcome that. There is no reason for that to be there. so it is just about being very conscious in that area. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you definitely gave us more insight into the distinction and the importance of closing both of those gaps. I've got some comments in here about, so I'll try and paraphrase in the chat about valuing, so if, for example, a woman was to leave work to have a family for a bit, there's skills that you gain while you're not currently at work that are still very valuable. It's coordination, it's attending school meetings, it's caregiving. And when women often return to work, there can be a career gap as well as a pay gap, because in that time you've stepped away from potentially a technical role, but there's other valuable skills. So I might pass this to you, Jill. Can you comment on how can we sort of close that career gap and also value these additional skills that are gained in that time that women away from work? Oh, I would just unmute you.
It's a very interesting question. When I went back to teaching, I've always joked that the women's movement of the 70s passed me by while I was having suburban neurosis in the heights of Kandala. And going back after being at home for 5 years with small children, 7 years, I guess, with small children, I was terrified. It took me 3 months in the school I was teaching at to find out where the staff cloakrooms were. People who have met me since look at me sometimes when I say that and say, I don't believe it, but it was absolutely true. What I was lucky enough to do in that time, though, was that the school where I was teaching at the time, I didn't have a qualification, so I decided to do an additional qualification for teaching while I was at home in those years. And the school agreed to have me back so that I could put my teaching lessons into practice, because otherwise I was just sitting at home making it all up. And that was good. And I think being able to use that time in some way like that, and in fact, for employers who want to bring people back as well, if it's an expectation they will come back, or hope that they will, there are ways in which you can still retain them and retain their interest and their commitment, which can be used. I think also it's about understanding the change when people come back, the other demands that they now have. And I think very much it's about ensuring that it is a safe culture, that is not one that relies on stereotypes, that it is one that is inclusive. So the main meetings aren't held at 5 o'clock when a woman is going home to look after the children. And the main decisions aren't made on a golf course, where men might happen to be playing as members of a senior management team. I was on a senior management team at Victoria of 13 people, 2 of us were women, and one of those was Māori. So again, how do you look across it? And the other thing I would add, which applies to that question and to others as well, is really around asking the question with everything you introduce. What is the impact of this on women? What is the impact of this on LGBTI+, which is an area that you're looking at increasingly closely? What is the area of this on the impact of this on parents who have children? What is the impact of this of COVID, for example? Always ask those questions around intersectionality in particular. We tend to say men earn this, women earn that. But as it's just been said, that's not the case. Put a Pākehā male, align them with a Pacifica woman, and the difference is far greater than it would be if it was a Pākehā man and a Pākehā woman. So it is also looking more particularly at those specific areas.
Thank you, Jill. So Normali'i, do you have anything you'd like to add as well on that? We've got these gaps between in careers and pay, and how can we sort of close these?
Yeah, I think Tani, you've got a formula. You've got to count people first. Until you have the data, it's really hard. I mean, no one intends to do harm or do ill to someone else normally, right? I mean, by far, yes, will always be someone who does dodgy stuff, but generally, I think Kiwis are well-meaning people, and so when I ask people, do you have an ethnic pay gap? Normally, well, we don't, we treat everyone fairly, so they don't know. So how do you know whether or not you're treating people fairly? And it's those who have been able to do that exercise of looking at gender, then looking at ethnicity, for example, and looking at our workers with disabilities and seeing where they are. And so human resources will know where they are. Senior executives may not know because they rely on human resources to tell them. So human resources know where people are located in the pay bands and that sort of stuff. So you have to do that exercise. So do begin to count. You know, if you're worried about a formula in the public services, develop a formula to help people in terms of ethnicity count. Because, you know, of course, I mean, I've got Chinese, I've got Samoan, you know, but you know, just to help you if you're needing a formula so that we're all consistent, and then start to measure the gap. The Human Rights Commission have only started measuring the ethnic pay gap since I arrived. And certainly in terms of if there are opportunities come up, we've stopped the shoulder tapping or the verbal, can you recommend someone? Now it's put out to everybody to express an interest. So everyone has equal opportunities. Those things that used to be okay in the past, no longer okay now. Because unless you hang out at the golf club or unless you've got time to go for drinks, you know, most of Modern Pacific needs to go home and, you know, and swap shifts so the next person can go to work. They haven't got time to come and mingle and then be part of that stuff. And that's really unequal. So, you know, think about how do you really make people visible, count them, and then measure them. And it doesn't matter if you find that your gap is 30% like Westpac did. Now you know, so now you can help, you know, rethink and do something about it. There's no shame in it. I try to tell, you know, companies, but please, you've got to start counting people so that you can see if you've got an issue, and then, you know, and then do something about it and talk to others who are also trying to do the right thing. But when you continue with the excuse that you don't have the data, for me, then we're getting into dangerous ground of purposely avoiding your responsibilities as leaders, as business owners, and your responsibility to uphold the human rights of the people who are providing a service and their talent to you so that your business can prosper. So no longer an excuse we don't know. Make an effort, talk to each other, support each other. As I said, there are tools already, but you start counting and then, you know, really supporting your people. Go ahead. Because I think New Zealand is in a position to do that. You know, we're world ranking on a number of things, and people expect us to be this amazing country. We think we're this amazing country. I don't think we're there yet. And that's the truth. And we need to move on. So it's great. Honestly, you said you come from Mangere. I live in Mangere. You know, it's like, how rare is it to have someone who comes from Mangere who's also Niuean, is an engineer? For goodness sake, it's so rare. So seeing your face makes me so proud. And thank you, Jacobs, for the opportunity given to you. But, you know, now young women will look at you, Pacific, Māori, whoever will look at you and think, if you can do it, so can I. So these are the sort of stories we need to tell about. Make engineering cool, make it possible, make it real, make it relatable, and you'll have followers. But just know that you're competing with the health sector and everybody else, the computer science sector, everybody else, you're competing for that talent, but it's worth it. Yeah, whaftai.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting about we need the data, and what else have we got to measure against if we don't have that data? I'm very conscious that we have gone a few minutes over time. It's such an interesting discussion and it's really difficult to try and keep to time. But if I could ask for some just closing remarks, if we go around the panel, just something you'd like to leave us with. We did have that third question of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you've got a comment on that. Tanya, I'd like to start with you, please, if just some closing remarks from you.
Very conscious of the time. I am very grateful for the opportunity and I'm honoured to be with the other panellists and yourselves on here. So thank you so much. My closing remarks is we are all trying at this, as has been said. We would love your input if you think there are other things we can do to help you individually. And Jacobs, please let us know. I've seen some comments about ideas for the Wonder Project. Please reach out to me directly. You know, Odyssey can give you my email if you don't have it. I would love to talk to you about any thoughts on anything, but particularly on the Wonder Project or the diversity agenda. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tanya. Jill, over to you for some closing remarks, please.
Firstly, there's some very good opportunities for data collection that have come from organisations like TAP and from the UN as well. Secondly, I would have loved us to have time to talk about the SDGs. I think a joined up vision which brings together people and planet for a more sustainable world where no one is left behind is critically important. The Auditor General has given our government a very negative report on this. It is worth reading. It is worth thinking about how can Jacobs and others help to change this. And the great feminist earlier this last century, I guess, Gloria Steinem talked about the need for intelligent rage. And I want to leave you with that because you have a role to play, each and every one of you, and as an organization with other organizations. Intelligence by its own, great, but very cerebral and often pretty boring. Even if it is data, it can be. Rage, well, rage for women of my generation, and I'm told it hasn't changed. It usually means it's that time of the month again. There she goes again. Well, let's just let that pass and she'll get over it. Put those two together and you can move mountains. And we need intelligent rage of each of every one of you involved here, your whānau, to say, this is not good enough. It's been like this for centuries. We still have the highest rates of violence in the OECD against women, the impact of COVID, the impact of climate change, all of this. And in their jobs, which we're talking about today, how do we make sure we do better and give women a fair chance? Thank you.
Kia ora, Jill. Thank you. I love intelligent rage. I wrote that down and I think I might make a poster out of that.
I wish I'd said it originally.
So normally, could we have some closing remarks from you, please?
Yeah, I love that. I might use that, Jill. Intelligent rage. You kind of reminded me of a few of my Pacific sisters. You know, when they're on fire, they're on fire. And even in the broken English, I don't even need to understand the words. I feel it, and I feel like I have to act and obey. But I just wanted to leave. I mean, thank you, Jacobs, for the work that you're doing. And Tanya, I feel like now I should come and try and hunt you down and have a talk. But you know, the proverb, the Samoan proverb, e pala upu, o e pala maa ele pala upu, is rocks degrade, but words endure. So now, Jacobs, that you've made this commitment, and same with you, Tanya, in terms of the accord, you've made this commitment, you've set the expectation. Now we've got to get together and follow through, because we will all benefit, but we don't want to wait for 30 years to benefit. We want to benefit much, much sooner. So, you know, we've tried to close the gender pay gap. You know, we're making our way there. You know, we've had this Equal Pay Act for 50 years. We don't want to wait another 50 years to get to zero. So as you said, Tanya, you know, you only had that accord in 2021, according to your PowerPoint, and you managed to close that equity gap down to what, less than 5% from 15. You managed to do that in a year. So I'm really, really positive that we can achieve our aspiration for the engineering sector and for our country generally around equity. But we do need to be prepared to do the work and to count people and not leave them invisible anymore. So whakatau love and all the best to you all for all that you do. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. That does bring our panel to a close. Apologies, we probably weren't able to go as in depth into all the questions as we would have liked initially, but this is a great start for us to have these conversations and to have these events. Thank you everyone to Jacobs who's tuned in online and in person. Please give us some feedback to the IND committee if you'd like to hear more of these events. We would love to run more of these and really get into these topics as well. A huge thank you to our guest speakers for their time and their input. This has been such a valuable and educational experience and a great opportunity to hear from such accomplished and experienced panelists. Thank you also to Gaia for being instrumental in setting this up. Without Gaia and UNANS, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you so much. And to Alex McDonald as well, who I think first made the introduction, who met Gaia and brought it to us. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We've got some resources from the UN magazines that I'll share in our office. I think they're in the other offices too. That's the end of our panel discussion for today. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you everybody so much. Ka kite.